Welcome to the Handcrafted Podcast, the business of making things. I'm Paul, founder of Philadelphia Table Company and the Handcrafted Network, and I believe great craftsmanship deserves great business strategy. This podcast is for makers who want to build not just great products, but a thriving business. Each episode will dive into the mindset, systems, and skills that turn craft into success. Hey guys, welcome back to the Handcrafted Podcast. I hope everybody is doing well. So, if you're listening to this podcast, it's likely because you are like me. You started a maker business, but didn't realize you had to do the business part of it. You started it because you liked making things, not because you liked running a business. So, with that said, I learned a lot about running a business, growing a business, turning a maker thing, making things into a business. I've been doing it for 11 years. That's why I created the Handcrafted Network. That's why I created the online community. That's why I created the classroom. That's why I created the group calls. All of those things are there to help you go from maker to business owner. That's the biggest thing. And there is no playbook. There is no one book you can go and learn and read from. The best way to do it is to learn from others. Learn what people are doing correctly, learn what people are doing incorrectly. I share all of those insights inside the community. I'm building my business alongside of you, as well as over 100 other professional woodworkers and semi-professional woodworkers. We're all building these things together and we're all learning together. So collective, hive mindset growth. If all of that stuff sounds interesting to you, if you want to learn how to go from craftsperson to business person or craftsperson to business owner or entrepreneur, any of those things, if you want to make a living doing what you're doing, I strongly urge you to join the Handcrafted Network. The link is below in the show notes or in the comments. You can also send me an email, paul@thehandcraftednetwork.com, if you have any other questions. It's called Handcrafted Success. It's a community of professional, semi-professional woodworkers, as well as classroom modules and group calls. All of those things come together to help you solve all of your business problems. So with that said, topic for today is how to get unstuck. Many of us get stuck at certain revenue levels. I know we have a few different groups of listeners to this podcast. We have some people that are solopreneurs who are starting in their garage, who are starting in their parents' basement or whatever. That's how I started. And then we have the people who are growing the business, but it's sort of stuck where it is. They may have one employee, two employees, something like that. So I wanted to talk about how I sort of got unstuck. I was reflecting a little bit on that. And, there's been a few podcast episodes where it's like the few things that led to my growth. And I realized it all boils down to sort of one major thing. That one major thing was I made the mental shift. And that's kind of what this podcast is. Usually I like to give sort of like tangible things that you can work on. But today I wanted to talk about sort of like a perspective shift. So the perspective shift is going from maker, craft person to business owner. That's a tough shift. That's a mental thing that I think blocks a lot of us, especially because we get into this because we're makers. And I don't want to say that I'm not a maker at heart. I'm not a furniture designer at heart. I'm not a craft person at heart. But at the end of the day, if I wanted to do this professionally, I knew I had to make the pivot to business owner, to business person. And I wanted to give you just like a little bit of a background story about how this has really helped me with my business. So some of you guys may or may not know, my wife's a 2-time breast cancer survivor. When she was first diagnosed with breast cancer, I had to be home with her. I wanted to be home with her. There were times that I needed to be taken away from my work. And what was happening was it was just like I could see the work not getting done. I could see the orders building up. I could see the business not growing, but I also needed to provide for my family. I needed to pay rent at the time. I needed to, pay for health insurance. I needed to take care of all of these other like life things. So I was sort of forced to grow the business in a way that allowed me to scale and push it through. So what happened was it boiled down to me coming up with, I need to be thinking of this as a business owner. I need to solve these problems as a business owner. I knew at that time doing better dovetail joints or better sanding techniques or better finishing techniques wasn't going to be the thing that pushed it to the next level, wasn't going to be the thing that broke me through. It wasn't the thing that was going to make me more money. What was going to make me more money was approaching this as a business owner. So what did I do? I started to seek sort of information and help, and sort of started to think and consume different things. I know a lot of you guys probably watch YouTube videos and listen to podcasts about people on how to like make stuff. But what I started doing was caring a little bit less about that and caring more about, how do I balance my books? How do I run a profitable business? How do I do accounting? How do I do better sales of processes? All of that stuff really helped change the mindset of what it was, because I was able to hire better people. I was able to hire craftspeople that were able to get the stuff done. So the one thing I urge you, and the one question that I ask of you, is what would happen if you stopped making things for 2 weeks? What would happen if you stopped making things for 1 week? What would happen if you stopped making things for 2 months? You're going to be caught in a very tough position, because you don't have the things around you. You don't have the problem solving that's required for, being a business owner, being a, creative business owner. So these are the things that you need to really start thinking about. If you're in that position, this is how you're going to break through that thing. I also, earlier this month, February is a little of a slower month for us anyways. So sometimes, as a typical entrepreneur, I'm sure many of you guys do this. Okay, what happens if this all stops? What's my sort of like backup, right? So for me, my backup was like, all right, well, what happens if I just boil it down to me? Can I sustain? Can I continue to live the way that I live? And I kind of started to run the numbers, and it was just like, it wasn't adding up. So you guys as single makers, I think, these numbers can sort of help you think about it in that way. So if you're doing, say, the way I was thinking about it was, okay, so max I can do probably in a week is like maybe one $10,000 project, or maybe like 2 dining tables, something like that. And like, so the max I can make is probably 10 grand top line per week. And from everything I've learned from running a business, what's sort of a reasonable profit margin, a good profit margin on that would basically be 20%. So like, once you're taking out the rent, once you're taking out the electricity, once you're taking out the all the other things required to sell that amount of stuff, maybe ad spend, all of that stuff, I might be pocketing $2,000 a week. And at the end of the day, that's not any money going back into the business. So that's no profit. That's me taking everything out. So that's me treating myself as a solo employee. And, $2,000 times 52 is what, 104? So you're making like $104,000, roughly $100,000, which is not enough money really to like, especially this day and age, for you to be able to like live reasonably, for you to be able to like provide for your family, for you to have health insurance, for you to pay mortgage, for you to, pay for groceries and go out to dinner and maybe, God forbid, take a vacation or two throughout the year. So I was just like, wow, this is totally not sustainable. So all of you guys who are stuck in at that point, I really urge you guys to sort of start thinking like a business owner. How do I get to the next thing? How do I break through this $100,000? How do I break through this $150,000? And even at $10,000 a week, that's over $500,000 a year, which is a lot in top line revenue to be doing as a single person. So what you need to be doing is thinking about, how do you scale? How do you grow beyond this number so that you can get these people there? So great places to go. Start looking for books. Start thinking like a business person. Some things that I really love. I have all this stuff listed in the online community. I love Jim Collins' books. I love the podcast, How I Built This. I think that podcast does an amazing job of breaking things down. I love The Diary of a CEO. There's another podcast that I listen to called My First Million, where they really break all that stuff down, sort of running a business and growing a business. Obviously, this podcast, so thank you for listening to this one. And so with that said, I want to come full circle with this and really re-emphasize and refocus. I talk a lot about finding your ideal customer, finding who your ideal avatar is. And, I've been doing a lot of reflecting about this podcast itself. And really, and I'm assuming that this is what many of you listeners are. I don't get a ton of feedback as to who it is, aside from when I get your emails and stuff. But, this podcast is really geared towards the people who want to make a living out of building things or making things. So those of you guys who are doing this as a hobby, that's totally fine. Keep it as a hobby. Or, you're just doing some cutting boards in your garage, like that's great. But this podcast is really for those people that are in that $150,000 range, that are really trying to grow, that really want to step on the gas and make a true, genuine living at this. And it's going to take a little bit of hard work. Just like I talked about in the last podcast, it is a game of whack-a-mole. And for me, I genuinely, when I started approaching it as a business owner mindset, I got really excited about it. I was like, okay, cool. I could continue to watch videos on how to make better dovetails joints, but that's not going to do anything. I could watch videos and learn and read books about how to run a better business. That's a game of never-ending problem solving. So if you're like me and you like building stuff, I genuinely think you're really, really going to also like building the business. To me, that's just like really cool to tinker, to pull this lever and see what this does. If I change the ad spend to this, what does this do? If I hire this person, how does that change this? And like, I wake up excited every single day to work on my business. Of course, there are times of stress. There are times of like heartbreak. There are times of just like total exhaustion, but there are also times of elation. There are times of me being able to be home with my newborn son. There are times of being home for my wife when I need to be home for that stuff. So all of that stuff is great. And I was listening to a recent podcast the other day, and they were talking about kind of different founders and different CEOs and different owners of like big companies. And the one thing that sort of was resonating with all these people is they were super obsessed with what they were building. And to me, that's exactly what I am. They asked Dell, the founder of Dell, somebody asked him how many hours did it take for him to start Dell? How many hours a week did he work to start Dell? And he looks at the podcast person and he just goes, all of them. Because really, I mean, if you're running a business, you totally understand this and you vibe with that, where it's like, it really is all of them. And I'm not like physically working all hours of the day. I definitely am at home with my family. And, I take the weekends off from like physically actually working, but my mind is always thinking. I'm always trying to find better ways to grow. I'm always trying to find better ways to scale or solve this problem or that problem. And that's the kind of obsession it takes to grow a business. And that's okay to have those sort of obsessions. Obviously, don't let it get in the way of like your marriage or your family or your home life or any of those things that are actually genuinely really important. But it's okay to be obsessed about this stuff. And I think as you dive in, as you start going, okay, how do I approach this as a business owner, not as a craft person, is really where you're going to start seeing those sort of critical unlocks. I don't have any super tactical things for you to start working on, particularly at this moment, because it's going to be uniquely individual to everybody. One thing I do have to say, though, is in the community we just talked about, we just had an entire group call about hiring and how to bring on those first people and what to think about and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of sort of tactical stuff in the group if you're interested in joining the group to get that stuff. You're also, I also invite you to reach out to me, Paul at thehandcraftednetwork.com, as well as continually listening to this. If you have sort of topic ideas or specific questions, always email them to me. I try to include as many as I can into the office hours episodes. I'm thinking of doing one in probably the next episode or two because the questions are starting to pile up a little bit. So with that said, the main thing today, I wish I gave you a little bit more of individual takeaways, actionable steps. But to me, the main thing is you need to start thinking like a business owner. If this is really what you want to do, if you really want to start making a living, if you really want to be making six figures doing this professionally, you need to think like a business owner, and you have no choice but to outgrow the garage. You have no choice but to no longer make cutting boards. Like you need to find, cutting boards, but just make a lot of them, a whole lot of cutting boards. But there's a way, to grow this thing. You really do need to think bigger. You need to think less like, how do I make this particular thing better versus how do I make this business better? And I ask you the question again, I'm going to end it with this. What would happen if you walked away or you were on vacation or you got sick for 2 weeks? What would happen to the business? And I know many of you guys aren't ready to hire people yet, but what you need to start doing is start thinking ahead, start planning, start putting the steps in place, start putting the blocks in place to get there. It's not going to happen overnight. There's like that one song, I Want It All, I Want It Now. I know I reference that a lot. it's not going to happen right this minute, but you need to start taking the little steps to get there. Say, okay, to hire a person, I need to hit here or start hiring forward, start reducing what you're paying yourself and figure out a way to bring in somebody, whether it be like a shop hand or a marketing person or somebody to do the website or somebody to do your books, all of that stuff, because every little incremental step is there. But again, you need to think about this as a business owner. And look, of course, I like to make stuff still. I still consider myself a furniture designer. I still consider myself a craftsman. I do a lot of that stuff on my own in my own house. I do some of the design stuff still at Philadelphia Table Company, but again, what fires me up every day is building the business, not building furniture per se. So with that said, everybody stay at it. If you have any other questions for me, if you have topic ideas, if you have stuff you want to include in the office hours episode, if you're interested in joining the community, send me an email, paul@thehandcraftednetwork.com. There's also a link for the community below in the show notes. And please subscribe, share, all of that stuff with this podcast. It's been amazing watching it grow. You guys, I'm getting more and more and more listeners every single week after week. I'm getting a lot of great feedback online that people are loving this, loving the content. So just make sure you let me know what you want to see more of. I'm here to help as much as I can. All right, guys. Peace.